they thought you would follow. That is the opening fact and the entire architecture of what I am about to describe, not a theory. The specific, confident, built from prior experience assumption of someone who has used this particular move before and who has learned through its previous applications that the walking away tends to produce a particular result. The following, the reaching, the specific, validating, I cannot let you leave quality of someone who chases the departure, who demonstrates through the chasing exactly how much access this person has to their interior, who turns the walking away into a source of power for the person doing the walking by revealing the cost of the absence. They were waiting for that. They did not get it. And what happens next in a power play that does not produce the expected result is the entire substance of this reading. I want to begin with what a power play actually is, because the title names it and it deserves its full examination rather than being left as a vague description of manipulative behavior. A power play is a move designed to test leverage, not to end something, to demonstrate the size of something, to produce evidence of how much the other person values what they have access to by creating the specific conditions in which the access is removed and the other person's response reveals the valuation. It is information gathering disguised as a conclusion. The walking away looks like an ending, is presented in its execution with the specific quality of something that is complete, that has made up its mind, that has arrived at a decision. But underneath the presentation of completion is the watching, the specific, calibrated, is this producing the expected response quality of someone who is not actually done, who has not actually concluded, who is waiting for the data that the move is designed to produce. The data is you, your response to the walking away. And the data that arrived was not what was expected. Let me describe the expected response, because understanding what they were waiting for is what makes clear why what actually happened is as significant as it is. They were expecting disruption, the specific, visible quality of your equilibrium being disturbed by their departure, not necessarily a dramatic display. The subtler forms count, the reaching out with more frequency than usual, the quality of your engagement being slightly off register in the direction of trying harder, the specific readable quality of someone who is feeling the absence of something significant and who is not quite as settled in its absence as they were in its presence. Any of these would have served as confirmation that the leverage was real, that the access they had to your interior was as significant as they estimated it to be, that the power play had worked. None of them appeared. You remained in your actual life, settled, without the disruption that the move was designed to produce. It is information gathering disguised as a conclusion. The walking away looks like an ending, is presented in its execution with the specific quality of something that is complete, that has made up its mind, that has arrived at a decision. But underneath the presentation of completion is the watching, the specific, calibrated, is this producing the expected response quality of someone who is not actually done, who has not actually concluded, who is waiting for the data that the move is designed to produce. The data is you, your response to the walking away, and the data that arrived was not what was expected. I want to describe the specific quality of what the watching has looked like, because The person who executed the power play did not simply walk away and stop paying attention. The walking away and the watching are simultaneous. They have been tracking, not obviously, not in a way that announces itself as the monitoring it is, but in the specific background running, keeps checking quality of someone whose attention remains organized around the situation even after the departure that was designed to look like the ending of that organization. Checking for the follow, checking for the reach out, checking for any of the specific signals that would confirm that the departure produced its intended effect. Each check has come back negative, and the repeated negative responses have been accumulating into the specific uncomfortable understanding that the move did not work in the way it was supposed to work. I want to speak to what your non-response actually communicated, because the absence of the expected response is itself a communication, a very specific one. It communicated that the leverage was overestimated. The specific, slightly devastating, cannot be argued with quality of information that arrives when a power play produces none of the expected results, where the gap between the estimated leverage and the actual leverage becomes visible not through any statement you made, but through the simple factual evidence of your behavior. You did not need what they thought you needed, not as a performance of not needing, not as the strategic management of your responses to avoid giving them the satisfaction of the data they were seeking, as the genuine, authentic, this is simply where I am quality of someone whose center of gravity was not as organized around them as they had estimated. The non-response told the truth, and the truth was that the power they believed they had over your equilibrium was not as large as the power they believed they had. I want to speak to what happened inside them when the expected response did not arrive. Because something significant happens when a power play fails to produce the expected response, and the internal experience of that deserves its examination, recalculation. The specific, slightly uncomfortable, requires honest examination quality of someone who has received information that contradicts a held assumption, who expected a particular result, built a particular plan on the expectation of that result, and who is now confronting the evidence that the plan's foundation was inaccurate. Not a single dramatic moment of reckoning. The gradual accumulating quality of checks for the expected response that keep coming back negative, of each day that passes without the following, without the reaching, without the visible disruption of your equilibrium, adding to the total of evidence that the assumption was wrong. And in the accumulation of that evidence, something that the power play was specifically designed to prevent, genuine uncertainty. The specific quality of someone who was operating from a position of confidence in their own leverage and who is now operating from the considerably less comfortable position of not knowing what their leverage actually is, of not knowing what you actually feel, of not knowing because you have not demonstrated it through the expected response whether what existed between you had the value to you that the power play assumed it had. The uncertainty is uncomfortable, and uncomfortable is not where someone who executed a power play expected to end up. The uncertainty is uncomfortable, and uncomfortable is not where someone who executed a power play expected to end up. I want to describe the specific quality of that discomfort more precisely, because it is not simply the ordinary discomfort of a plan not working. It is the specific, particular quality of discomfort that comes from having revealed yourself in the attempt, because a power play that does not produce the expected result reveals more about the person who executed it than about the person it was executed on. It reveals that they expected following. It reveals that their model of the relationship had the other person more dependent than the other person turns out to be, that they had overestimated their own centrality to the other person's equilibrium, that the confidence with which they executed the move was built on an assumption about the dynamic that the dynamic, when tested, did not support. The failed power play is, in this way, a more revealing act than the power play that succeeds, because the successful power play confirms what the person executing it already believed. The failed one teaches them something about the other person, about the actual nature of the leverage they thought they had, about the specific corrected picture of the dynamic that the evidence has now produced. They are in that correction daily, finding it uncomfortable. Let me speak to something important about the walking away that I think is the most practically useful piece of this reading. The walking away was not an ending. I want to say this directly because I think it is what you most need to hear in the context of this situation, not as comfort, as the specific, accurate, energetically grounded assessment of what the move actually was and therefore what its current status actually is. They are not gone. They are in position, the specific waiting position of someone who executed a move and who is in the monitoring phase, who has not concluded, who has not resolved their feelings or their interest or the specific ongoing continues in their interior quality of what they carry about you, who is in the specific, watchful, slightly less certain than they were position of someone whose move did not produce the expected return. That position is not the position of someone who has ended something. It is the position of someone who is figuring out what comes next. Tell me in the comments if you have been feeling this, if the specific quality of the situation I am describing, the walking away that did not feel quite like an ending, that had the specific, slightly off-register quality of something that was staged rather than simply real, has been in your awareness. Whether the monitoring quality I described has been visible to you in some form. Tell me if this reading is finding the right situation. I want to speak to what comes next, because the power play that fails to produce the expected result does not simply hold in place indefinitely. Something has to give, and what gives is the position, the specific maintained. I am waiting for the following position becomes increasingly untenable the longer the following does not arrive, because positions of this kind have a life expectancy. They are designed to be temporary, to be the pressure that produces the response. And when they do not produce the response, they begin to cost more than they were anticipated to cost. The cost is the absence. What they walked away from, they are also absent from. And the absence, designed to be brief and strategic and productive of a particular outcome, is instead becoming its own thing, its own duration, its own accumulating daily quality of not having what was walked away from. And what was walked away from, it turns out, has a value that the power play underestimated. That value is becoming apparent in its absence to them in the specific daily, this is what I gave up quality of someone who is no longer in the presence of what they had and who is beginning to understand through the experience of not having it what it actually was. To them, In the specific daily, this is what I gave up quality of someone who is no longer in the presence of what they had and who is beginning to understand through the experience of not having it what it actually was. I want to describe what this understanding looks like in practice, because it is not a single clear-eyed moment of recognition. It is more gradual and more ordinary and more uncomfortable than that. It looks like noticing gaps, the specific small daily quality of encountering situations that the connection with you would have made different, better, more interesting, more nourishing, where the texture of an ordinary day has a particular quality without you in it that it did not have with you in it, not dramatic gaps. The subtle accumulating ones that are only visible to someone who has the comparison available. They have the comparison available. They lived in the with you version. They are now in the without you version. And the without you version keeps producing its evidence. Not loudly. In the specific, quiet, one ordinary, moment at a time quality of an accumulation of evidence that requires no single dramatic revelation, simply the consistent, daily, know you quality of their current experience, demonstrating over and over again that you were a more significant presence in their life than the power play's confidence suggested. They believed you were. That accumulation is the education, and the education is producing the correction. I want to describe the specific thing they are beginning to understand. They underestimated you, not in a general, you are more than they realized sense. In the specific, functional, I built a move on an inaccurate estimate of your dependence sense. They underestimated your self-possession, your capacity to be in your own life fully and without the specific organizing around them quality of someone who is dependent on a particular person's presence to maintain their equilibrium. And the underestimation is now being corrected by evidence, the evidence of your actual behavior in the absence of them, which has been exactly what it needed to be. Not performed, not managed, simply what it was, because you are who you are, and who you are was not disrupted by their departure in the way they anticipated. The correction of the underestimation is a significant thing because corrected estimates tend to produce corrected behavior. And corrected behavior in someone who underestimated you and who is now understanding the actual scale of what they walked away from tends to move in a particular direction toward you. I want to speak to what your position is right now, not where they are, where you are. You are in the best position available, not because you engineered it, not because you executed a counter strategy or deliberately managed your responses to produce a particular effect, because you simply were who you are, which is the most powerful position available to any person in any dynamic. The position of being genuinely in your own life, not performing contentment, not performing moving on, not performing the specific calculated display of someone who wants to produce a particular impression in the person who is watching. Simply being in the authentic, daily, this is what my life looks like quality of someone who is actually occupying their own experience rather than organizing it around someone else's gaze. That authenticity is what the power play collided with. And authenticity is the one thing that a power play cannot defeat, because a power play depends on the other person organizing themselves around it on the other person's responses being shaped by the move that was made. And authenticity does not organize itself around anyone else's moves. It simply is what it is. And what it is turns out to be more than what was accounted for. And authenticity is the one thing that a power play cannot defeat, because a power play depends on the other person organizing themselves around it, on the other person's responses being shaped by the move that was made. And authenticity does not organize itself around anyone else's moves. It simply is what it is. And what it is turns out to be more than what was accounted for. I want to give this one more specific dimension, because I think it is the most important thing for you to understand about your own position. Your authenticity was not a response. This is the key, and the key is what makes your position so impenetrable in this dynamic. A response is reactive. It is shaped by what produced it. A performance of moving on is reactive to the walking away. A display of indifference is reactive to the power play. Even a counter strategy, however well executed, is reactive because it was produced by something outside itself. What you did was not reactive. You simply continued being who you are, doing what you do, living the life that is genuinely yours, in the specific, unremarkable, not organized around any particular person quality of someone who has enough of their own substance that the departure of someone from their periphery does not reorganize the center. That is not a response to the power play. It is the absence of one. And the absence of a response is the one thing a power play cannot account for, cannot strategize around, cannot incorporate into its expected outcomes. Because the entire architecture of the power play is built on the assumption that a response will come. The response did not come. The architecture collapsed, and what stands in its absence is simply you, being yourself, which turns out to be the most effective thing available. As we close, I want to give you the full picture of where this stands. A power play that was designed to demonstrate leverage revealed instead that the leverage was overestimated, that produced uncertainty in the person who executed the move. That produced in the uncertainty a period of monitoring that has been becoming increasingly uncomfortable as the expected response continues not to arrive. And that is now producing the internal correction of an inaccurate estimate of who you are and what your absence means. That correction is underway. It is moving toward an expression. Which direction that expression takes, whether it becomes an acknowledgement of the miscalculation or simply the quietly reverse momentum of someone who is working their way back toward what they walked away from, is something that the coming days will answer. What you do not need to do is anything. The power play has already revealed what it needed to reveal. Not about you, about them, about the specific inaccurate model they had of how you work and what you need and how much their departure was going to cost you. The model has been corrected by your simply being who you are. And who you are, Virgo, it turns out, is not someone who follows